without further ado, Evan Parker.
All right, thanks everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Hopefully we're all going to learn something and have a good time. So let me just say thanks again to all our sponsors. We appreciate you making this a reality tonight, especially Sanctuary Brewing for letting us use your facility tonight. It's awesome. Okay, so again, my name's Evan Parker. I'm a graduate student at Lenore-Ryan. Hold on a second. That's fine. All right, I'm a graduate student at Lenore-Ryan University, working on my master's degree in sustainability studies. As Grace said, I also was a former employee at Mountain True, and I'm a vegan advocate. I volunteer with Asheville Vegan Outreach and just generally do vegan advocacy. So I was really fortunate in my master's degree I was able to study veganism and vegan advocacy and really put a lot of my focus on that. And so I've really explored the connections between veganism and sustainability, and that's what I hope to share with you tonight. As Grace said, looking at the intersections between veganism and sustainability. Okay, so I want to say at the end we're going to have a Q&A, so if you have any questions, just jot them down, hold on to them. At the end we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes to do a little Q&A. So before we get started, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you consider yourselves environmentalists? So basically everybody. That's awesome. That's what we're hoping for tonight. This is a presentation for environmentalists. So how many of you are vegans? So about half maybe? That's awesome though. That's exactly what we want. We want some non-vegans. We want some vegans here. We have different perspectives, and yeah, that's an amazing thing. We want to have some non-vegans and vegans here. That's perfect. Okay, so let's get started. So obviously this is a presentation about sustainability. So a lot of times these kinds of talks become really negative, right? They become very just kind of doomsday and apocalyptic. And I don't want to have that tonight, actually. I want this to be a very positive experience, okay? And so tonight is not about dwelling on the problem. We know that we face serious environmental challenges. That's why we're all here today, right? We face serious challenges in creating a sustainable world. We're not going to dwell on the problem. We're going to focus on solutions. Solutions. So again, tonight is about solutions, and it's about a vision of a better world, a world that we want to see, okay? And we're going to talk about one particular solution that we can impact every single day of our lives, and it's a relatively easy solution to implement compared to a lot of environmental issues. And that solution is to go vegan. It's veganism. So at this point, I'm sure some of you are thinking, how can veganism help us create a sustainable world? How is that possible? And really, that's the question we're going to answer tonight. How can veganism help us create a sustainable world? How can veganism help us address the environmental challenges that we face? So hold on to that question while we go through this presentation. Okay, so the first thing we have to discuss, if we're answering this question, how can veganism help us create a sustainable world? We have to look at the environmental impacts of agriculture and then compare the environmental impacts of crop agriculture versus animal agriculture, because there's a big difference there. So in general, when we look at the environmental impacts of agriculture as a whole, the impacts are extensive. So agriculture accounts or takes up 50% or 1/2 of all ice-free land on the planet. Okay. In addition to that, agriculture is responsible for almost 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions and around 90% of humanity's freshwater footprint. And finally, agriculture is the largest contributor to biodiversity loss globally. Okay, so as we can see, agriculture has substantial environmental impacts. Potentially, it might be the most environmentally destructive industry on the entire planet. And it's something we have to do to feed the human population. But at the same time, we have to find a way to reduce those environmental impacts. So we're going to compare the impacts of crop agriculture versus animal agriculture right now. Okay, we're going to do that by looking at a few different environmental issues and looking at the data. I want to say here that everything that we're talking about tonight is sourced directly from peer-reviewed science. Okay, I think we're all really tired of alternative facts, and we're ready to get some real information, okay? So this is all coming right from the science. So let's start with climate change. So about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to animal agriculture alone. That's more than the entire global transportation sector. This means that animal agriculture creates more greenhouse gas emissions than every single car, truck, boat, plane, and train combined. Okay, substantial. So in a 2014 study, the researchers examined 555 life cycle assessments, or LCAs, on 82 types of crops and animal products. For those of you who aren't familiar, an LCA, or a life cycle assessment, is basically a thorough and scientific study that seeks to quantify the environmental impacts of producing a certain good. Okay? And so what they found is really astounding. They found that ruminant meat, and this is animals like cows, is 280 times more carbon intensive than legumes. That is an incredible number. So when you eat cow, you are producing 280 times more greenhouse gas emissions than if you eat legumes or beans. Now, to be fair, that is an extreme example. Legumes are the lowest emitting agricultural product there is, while ruminant meat or cow meat is the most environmentally or most carbon intensive animal product. What about dairy? Dairy is actually one of the lowest emitting animal products, and it is still 26 times more carbon intensive than legumes or beans. So that is a substantial amount more carbon intensive. So what about other crops? What are the greenhouse gas emissions of various other crops compared to animal products? Well, on a per calorie basis, every single animal product produces more greenhouse gas emissions than even the most carbon intensive crops. So you could be eating the most carbon intensive plant, and it still produces less greenhouse gas emissions than any animal product there is. So we talked about 280 times more carbon intensive. We just talked about that. So what does that look like? How can we understand that a little better? Well, 2,000 calories of cow meat. And that's not a lot. 2,000 calories, an average American most certainly eats that in a week. That is the equivalent of burning 12 pounds of coal in greenhouse gas emissions. If we look at beans, if you eat 2,000 calories of beans, that is only 0.04 pounds of coal burned. Okay, so we can see really the impact that switching to a plant-based diet can have in relation to climate change. Okay, so another study, this is a 2016 study, so very recent. It was a review of the literature. So they reviewed 63 studies related to the environmental impacts of various diets. So they identified 14 sustainable diets, really all of them involving either less animal product consumption or different types of animal product consumption. What did they find? They found that vegan diets resulted in the lowest greenhouse gas emissions of any diet. Okay, they reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 51% compared to typical diets. So what this means is that just by going vegan, you can cut your dietary greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. You can cut them in half. And this is an industry that contributes 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a substantial potential, or incredible potential, to reduce our carbon footprint. Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit. Let's talk about land use change. So land use change is any alteration to a natural landscape by humans. So this often takes the form of deforestation, cutting down forests, to put in some kind of human development. So that could be agricultural development, urban or rural development, etc. Okay? So 75% of agricultural land is used for animal products. So the vast majority of all our agricultural land is used for producing animal products and not crops. Okay? This translates into about 30% of all ice-free land on Earth is being used to produce animal products. Again, this is a substantial amount of land. It's hard to comprehend the amount of land we use to produce the animal products that we consume. So what does that look like? Okay, so the same study we just talked about in relation to climate change, the review of the literature, they also looked at land use. And what they found is that vegan diets reduced land use by 45% compared to typical diets. Okay, and again, the vegan diet was the best in terms of reducing land use requirements. So we find the exact same thing. Just by adopting a vegan diet, you can reduce the land use requirements of your diet by almost 50%. Cut it almost in half. And this, again, is so substantial when half of all ice-free land on Earth is being dedicated to agriculture. It would be so amazing from a sustainability perspective to bring that number down and to be able to, end deforestation and start reverting some of that agricultural land back to wilderness. So a separate study looked at deforestation and the potential to feed the world without additional deforestation. And what they found is that a global vegan diet would actually reduce cropland demand in 2050 compared to 2000 levels. So we have to think about that for a second. When you're talking about the human population in 2050 compared to 2000, there are billions of more people on the planet. So we're saying that if people adopted a vegan diet globally, we could actually require less cropland in 2050, even with billions of more people on the planet, than what was required in 2000. So what about fresh water use? So animal agriculture is responsible for 27% of humanity's freshwater or water footprint, okay? So what about adopting plant-based diets? So one study found that vegetarian diets could reduce individual water footprint by 36%. And I think given the trends here, we can assume that a vegan diet would reduce that water footprint even more. Okay, so we see this across the board in all of these environmental issues. Adopting a plant-based diet can reduce your dietary greenhouse gas emissions, your dietary land use, and the dietary fresh water requirements. And then finally, what about biodiversity loss? Well, this is actually the title of a 2015 study, and it's pretty incredible. The title is Biodiversity Conservation. The key is reducing meat consumption. And what they found is that animal agriculture is the single biggest driver of biodiversity loss and extinction events on the globe. And this is for all the reasons we just discussed. Because land use change, particularly habitat loss, climate change, and excessive water use all impact biodiversity and cause extinction events. Okay, and so because of all these environmental impacts, animal agriculture is the largest driver of biodiversity loss. Okay, so we see very clearly that animal agriculture is extremely destructive to the environment, especially compared to crop agriculture. So you might be asking yourself, what about pastured or organic agriculture? We hear a lot about how these types of animal agriculture, some people call them sustainable, are better for the environment. And the truth is, this is a very contested point. There aren't clear answers on this. So some science does show that pastured or organic animal agriculture does provide some benefits compared to their factory farmed or conventional counterparts. But this is not always the case, particularly with cows. In fact, conventional cows or factory farmed cows actually produce less greenhouse gas emissions than their pastured counterparts. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, pastured cows take longer to reach slaughter weight, okay? They also produce less meat than their factory farm counterparts. And so they produce more greenhouse gas emissions. And so buying organic or pastured animal products is not a guarantee that you're reducing your greenhouse gas or reducing the environmental impact of your diet. So even if we say that maybe eating pastured or organic animal products reduces the impact a little bit, can those agricultural products have a lower environmental impact than crops? And the answer is, in almost every case, no. And this is for some very basic reasons. One, we feed the vast majority of the crops we grow, the grains we grow, to livestock. Okay, so 36% of crop calories grown in the world are fed to livestock. So this is a substantial number. And this is a very inefficient process. converting plant calories to animal calories results in only 10% efficiency. So when you move up trophic levels, right, that's like the food web. So when an herbivore eats plants, only 10% of that energy, moves up. 90% of that energy is lost. Okay, and that goes up all the way. Every time an animal eats a plant and then an animal eats another animal, 90% of that energy is lost. And this goes back directly to the second law of thermodynamics. This is basic laws of physics. The law of entropy, which states that any time that there is a chemical reaction, that there's going to be a loss of energy. There's never an 100% efficient system. Okay? And so this is why there's very basic science to explain the reason that we see that crop agriculture has such a smaller or so much of a lower environmental impact than animal agriculture. It's because of simple energy transfer in the second law of thermodynamics. And so what this means is that regardless of system, if you eating crops is going to have a smaller environmental impact than eating animal products. And that's not to say that the system isn't important, it is. We should be striving to buy local, and potentially organic crops. Those are probably better, and they certainly are better than conventional crops grown in, giant monoculture farms out in the Midwest. But if you're talking about eating a pastured animal product versus a conventional crop, you're better off eating that conventional soy from an environmental perspective than buying a, organic cow meat. Environmentally speaking, the crop wins out every time. Okay. So at this point, we see, based on the science, very clearly that crop agriculture has a far smaller environmental impact. And more than that, we see that to create a sustainable food system, especially with a growing human population, we have no choice but to adopt plant-based diets. We simply cannot create a sustainable food system eating animal products. And actually, let me go back a slide here on that point. I want to bring up one last thing. The top predators in any ecosystem occupy that top part of the triangle, right? And what this means is that any top predator in an ecosystem, they always have the least amount of biomass, the smallest population. And it's because of that energy transfer. There's a lot less energy and a lot less resources available for those top predators at the top of an ecosystem than the herbivores eating plants. And so this means that there is no possible way that humans can sustainably eat animal products at any large quantities. Because you simply can't have 7.5 billion humans occupying the top part of this pyramid in every ecosystem. It's going to cause serious ecological harm. So given these facts, you might be saying to yourself, well, is veganism really necessary? We see that veganism is likely the most environmentally friendly diet. But we could, in all honesty, probably create a sustainable food system, just by greatly reducing animal product consumption. We could probably produce some animal products and still have a sustainable food system. So why veganism? Well, there's a few reasons for this. One, we have to consider the ethical implications of consuming animals. And we're going to get to that. But beyond that, I believe that there are additional sustainability benefits associated with veganism beyond just the dietary, the impacts of shifting dietary patterns. So we're going to talk more about what veganism means to answer this question. And we're going to talk about the logical and philosophical basis of veganism. But before we get there, I want to tell you all a couple stories. And I think that's because veganism in a lot of ways is something you have to feel. It's not just something that you decide based on logic, that's part of it, but it's something we feel, okay? So this guy right here in this picture, this little doggy, this is Oliver. Okay, and unfortunately, Oliver was born into really horrific circumstances. So Oliver was born on a dog farm in Yulin, China, okay? And this is a little hard to see, and there's nothing going to be any more, there's not going to be anything graphic. But we have to understand, this is what's happening to animals in our world right now, okay? So Oliver grew up in horrific conditions. He was never supplied adequate food. He was never given clean water. He lived his life in filthy conditions and never received any love or care, okay? He was property. He was simply property, born to be slaughtered and consumed by humans. Unfortunately, All the dogs you saw in that last picture, none of them survived. None of them survived. They were all consumed by humans. However, Oliver was very lucky, and this is the happy part of the story. That's Oliver you see now. And you can see he's so much healthier and happier. He was rescued by some really compassionate people. And so now he's receiving the love and the care that he and all other animals deserve. Okay, so I want you to think about the emotions you might have felt while you heard Oliver's story. When you heard about the fact that he was brought up on a farm, and when you heard that he had, escaped that fate and is living a happy, healthy life now. So this cute little lamb is Duck, okay? This is actually a local. Some of you might know, but Duck was rescued by Brother Wolf, actually. And Duck has a disability. He was born with no front legs. And in a strange irony, being born with this disability almost certainly saved Duck's life, okay? Just like Oliver, Duck was born as property. He was born to be consumed and slaughtered and consumed for humans, okay? But the woman pictured here, Amy, she's the wife of the farmer who owns this lamb farm, sheep farm, okay? She doesn't eat any of the animals raised on this farm. And when she saw Duck with his disability, she couldn't bear to see him killed. And so she brought him to Brother Wolf and asked them to take him in and save him. And so now, thankfully, just like Oliver, Duck is now receiving the care and the love that he deserves. I mean, look at that little guy. I mean, he's adorable. He's adorable, right? So what can this all tell us? What can these stories tell us? Well, I wonder, and just think about it to yourself, did you feel different emotions when you heard Oliver's story compared to when you heard Duck's story? And I bring this up for a very, very specific reason. So in our society, we look at the idea of consuming a dog or a cat as unthinkable, as horrific. And I believe it is horrific. But at the same time, we routinely exploit and kill and eat animals like duck, lambs, and cows and pigs and chickens. And at the end of the day, there is no difference between cats and dogs and cows, pigs, and chickens. All of these animals, they want to live. They all can suffer. They all can experience happiness, and they all value their own lives. They have an inherent value in their own life beyond, humans' instrumental use for these sentient beings. Okay, so now let's discuss the logical and philosophical basis of veganism a little bit. Let's dive into this a little more. So here we see, this is the definition of veganism from the Vegan Society. Okay, so I'll let you all read that. Okay, so I want you to read that and think about, is this the way you perceived veganism before coming in here today? We have a lot of ideas about what veganism is. And I don't know, maybe those are correct and maybe not. But read about it and think about how this compares to your previous perception of veganism. So I like to simplify that definition a little bit and just say this. Veganism is a philosophy, a lifestyle that rejects the needless exploitation, violence, and death of animals. Okay? So let that sink in for a second. So I honestly hope and I believe that we can all agree on this basic sentiment. If we can live our lives without harming animals and exploiting animals, shouldn't we do that? I mean, we take that approach with humans. We take that approach with dogs and cats and animals we view as companion animals, right? We would never do anything intentionally to harm them. So veganism is about extending that stance against exploitation, that stance against harming animals to all animals, okay? And I believe that, again, people believe with this basic sentiment. Few people intentionally harm animals. We don't want that. We want to care for animals. So I think the real question becomes, for most people, is defining needless. Okay, so we looked at that definition, right? We said that veganism is rejecting needless exploitation, violence, and death. So what do we mean by needless? Okay, and this is a big topic. We could look at every way that we use animals and discuss, is this actually a human need? Is this actually something we need, or is it a needless violence, right? But we frankly don't have time to go into every aspect of veganism and every way we use animals. So we're going to focus on the big question, where 99.9% of animal exploitation happens. And the question is, do we need animal products for proper health? Is this something we need? So according to the American Dietetics Association, and this is the largest organization of nutrition professionals globally, this is their official statement on vegetarian diets. And I'm going to read this out. So appropriately planned vegetarian, including vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits for the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. They will go on to say that veganism is appropriate for all stages of the life cycle. So this includes pregnant women, infants, up to the elderly. Okay, so anybody can be healthy on a vegan diet. In addition, what are those diseases that veganism can help prevent or treat? Okay, and they will go on to say that plant-based diets have the potential to reduce chances of heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and even certain types of cancer. These are some of the most common types of chronic illnesses that plague our society, and they can be greatly reduced by adopting plant-based diets. So what other evidence do we have for the healthfulness of a fully plant-based diet or a vegan diet? Well, some of the top athletes in the entire world are vegan. So pictured here is Patrick Bobabian, probably butchered that name, but he's a German, Iranian-born German man, and he's one of the strongest men in the entire world. He holds multiple world records in, the strongmen competitions. So not a bodybuilder. When I say he's one of the strongest men in the world, I really mean that, okay? He is a committed vegan. And there are other top athletes that have adopted plant-based diets. So for instance, Venus and Serena Williams have also adopted plant-based diets. And there's more examples of this. And then finally, there are actually millions of people today that are thriving and surviving on a fully plant-based diet. And so I think this evidence, and I'm not a nutrition professional, and there's a lot more information on health, and I wish we had more time today to dive into these issues, but I think what we find is that the science, and even the anecdotal evidence, really points to the conclusion that the vast majority of people can survive and thrive on a fully plant-based diet. We simply do not need to consume animal products for our health. Okay, so if not for health, why do we consume animals? So here are 3 of the top reasons that we consume animals, even if it's not a conscious reason, it's just something we do unconsciously as a matter of habit. Well, first is palate pleasure. Okay, we consume animal products because they taste good. Like I'm sure I heard it today and I hear it all the time. Like I really don't want to give up my cheese, right? I need my milk, whatever it might be. We really like the taste of animal products. That's fair, right? Convenience. People do it because it's convenient. It's easy. There's animal products all over the place in our society. It's a very convenient thing to do. And finally, tradition or culture, right? A lot of us have, in our culture, in our cultural traditions, involve consuming animal products. So the question we have to ask ourselves, can these things justify exploiting and killing animals? And I think the answer is a resounding no. Okay, we cannot put trivial pleasures like our taste buds or convenience or even our traditions, we cannot say that those justify killing and exploiting animals. We simply should not be taking an animal's right to bodily autonomy. It's theirs and they deserve it. Okay, so finally we can get to our last question here, our last aspect of the presentation today. So what is the connection between veganism and sustainability? That's what we're going to look at. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this. Okay, so what is sustainability? I'm sure a lot of people here have a lot of idea about what sustainability is, but we're going to talk about it just a little more. So the UN defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay? And so this gets to a big portion of sustainability, although I would say this definition is not complete, and we'll get there in a second. But this hits on the fact that sustainability is very much about ensuring that future generations have the same wealth of material resources that we have today, and so that they can maintain their livelihoods and live a life at least as good as we live now. That's a big part of sustainability. But sustainability is more than that. So I think a really helpful framework for understanding sustainability is the three pillars. You might have heard of the triple-legged stool. And so what this says is that sustainability has three interconnected parts: ecological sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. Okay? And so we're gonna look at each one of these in turn and basically see how can veganism contribute to sustainability in that area. And we'll talk a little bit about what those types of sustainability mean as well. Okay, so first off, ecological sustainability. So we already talked about the environmental benefits associated with reducing animal product consumption and shifting to plant-based diets, and they're substantial. So we've already been there, we'll leave it at that. But I believe there are other ways that adopting a vegan ethic could actually promote ecological sustainability. So I think the best example of that is protecting wildlife and preserving biodiversity. So if people adopt a vegan ethic, what this does is it gives people further motivation to protect wild animals, not just livestock animals, farm animals, not just companion animals, but wild animals as well. Okay? So it's not just about preserving biodiversity and species, it's about protecting those individuals' right to exist on this earth with us as well, as individuals. So a lot of people don't know this, but the USDA Wildlife Service killed 2.7 million wild animals in 2016 alone. In addition, they killed roughly 77,000 coyotes and 21,000 beavers. And then you can see they killed hundreds of these other animals, and you can read them there. Okay, why did they do this? They killed these animals to protect farmers' livestock. And this is all from the Center of Biological Diversity. And the Center of Biological Diversity says that the killing of these animals in the United States, these millions of animals, is preventing some of these animals that are endangered or threatened from recovering. It's preventing them from recovering and existing in the numbers that they should. So we see a really practical example of how if we adopted a vegan ethic, you would hope that these type of actions would stop. That we would put a stop to these, not just because it's bad for biodiversity and bad for the environment, but also because it's wrong to kill these animals just for trying to live their lives, just like we try to live our lives. Okay, so what about economic sustainability? So economic sustainability is about making sure that we have strong, sustainable, and equitable economies that work for all people, right? So plant-based diets can actually provide significant economic benefits. And so two primary ways they do this is by reducing environmental destruction, and actually reducing environmental destruction produces a lot of economic benefits for various reasons. It also reduces healthcare costs. We talked about how plant-based diets can prevent certain chronic illnesses, right? So that is going to reduce healthcare costs as well. So one 2016 study found that plant-based diets could produce $1.6 billion in annual benefits. Now that's a big number, but that's actually a very low estimate, almost certainly. They only looked at healthcare benefits of reducing healthcare costs, and they also looked at the economic benefits of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So they didn't even look at all the other environmental benefits associated with plant-based diets and quantify those economically. They only looked at greenhouse gas emissions. So 1.6 billion as a minimum annually, but it would probably be much, much more than that. So significant economic benefits associated with plant-based diets. And finally, we have social sustainability. So before we talk about veganism in relation to social sustainability, what does social sustainability mean? And I think this is the most value-driven aspect of sustainability, okay? Social sustainability is about, sustainability being more than just meeting the basic material needs of future generations. Social sustainability says that we want to create a future that's better for everybody. A better, more equitable future, right? And so social sustainability has a lot of values that underpin it, and then it has goals associated with it. So some of these values are justice, equity, compassion, freedom, and tolerance, right? And then some of these goals associated with social sustainability are to dismantle systems of oppression. So to dismantle systems like, racism and sexism and classism and ableism, etc. Okay? And beyond that, it's about reducing suffering and improving everybody's well-being across the globe. Well, I would say that veganism actually shares very closely these values and goals. Veganism embraces values like justice and compassion and freedom. It also has the exact same goals. It seeks to dismantle the oppression of animals. It seeks to reduce suffering of all sentient beings across the globe and improve the well-being of everybody. And so I think what we find here is that because of this amazing interconnection between the social sustainability and veganism, promoting veganism actually promotes the values that underpin sustainability. When you promote veganism, you also promote justice, you promote compassion, you promote freedom. And you promote these goals as well. And so I think what we see here is very clearly that promoting veganism and adopting veganism for ourselves, leads to improving the social sustainability of our communities and our societies. So finally, sustainability, to me, and I think a lot of people would agree, sustainability is about a vision of a better world. It's about a vision. What kind of future do we want to see? And I think a lot of people promoting sustainability want to see the best future possible. And so sustainability is never an end goal. There's no final end goal of sustainability. It's a journey where we continuously do better and better and improve everyone's well-being, as best as we can, forever. We never stop trying to make things better and embracing sustainability. And so when we think about the future we want to see, the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we accept exploitation and violence? Do we want to see a future where our societies are built on the exploitation of animals? Right now, we slaughter and kill, and most of these animals live in horrific, torturous conditions. But we slaughter and kill tens of billions of animals annually. Do we want to base our societies on this type of large-scale systematic exploitation and violence? Or do we embrace compassion and justice and freedom? Do we want to see a society where all people live in freedom and can experience their greatest well-being? Okay? I want to see a future in which we care and love for all humans, but also all of our fellow animals on this planet. That's the future I want to see. And I think at the end of the day, if we want to see this future, a future where we make the world better for all humans and all animals, we have to embrace veganism. Veganism is the only way we can make that vision a reality. Thank you. So I put a couple resources up here. The first one is vegansociety.com, and I included the entire hyperlink, but you can just go to their website in general. They have a lot of good information on vegan nutrition and health, and a lot of information about veganism in general. I also put the Facebook page for Asheville Vegan Outreach, and Caitlin is in the back at the Brother Wolf table, so they're there to support anybody that's looking to go vegan or has questions about veganism, so please reach out to her if you'd like. And of course, you can contact me with any questions or support. This is my email up here. I'll leave this up, so if anybody wants to take down my email, please feel free to do so. So now I want to take some questions. We have a little bit of time, about 15 minutes, and I hope we have some questions, because I know this is a topic that is a little controversial, so I want to hear it. Yes, Lisa.
Can you talk a little bit about the pork industry in the state of North Carolina and the sustainability issues here, in addition to the human rights violations that happen on the eastern part of the state, predominantly to minority?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about hog farming, right, pig farming in North Carolina. So some of you might be a little familiar with this, but this is a huge problem. So this is primarily on the eastern side of the state, but I believe North Carolina is the second biggest hog producer in the country. Might be first? First? Okay, so the biggest hog producer, second? Okay, so behind Iowa, okay. So we produce an enormous amount of hogs in this state. Okay, and these are mostly in this factory farm systems out on the eastern side, and this causes substantial problems, right? So from what I understand, first of all, it causes serious water quality issues because simply there is a lot of manure, and what do you do with all that manure? There's no good way to dispose of all that manure. And so what they do is they spray the manure. They keep it in giant pits, and they spray it onto fields. Okay, so this causes a couple of really serious problems. One, if there's any flooding, like there was, I think earlier this year we had those big floods, or maybe that was last year, but all of that manure just washed out into the waterways, causes serious environmental degradation. More than that, when they spray this manure out into the fields, it sprays all over these communities. And so these factory farms are primarily located in low-income communities that are typically people of color, right? And so this is a clear-cut case of environmental racism, where these industries move in and really exploit communities of color and low-income communities. These people can't breathe. Their houses are literally covered in manure. Okay, it's a serious problem. And so across the board, this is something that's happening in our backyard. And at the end of the day, the best solution to dealing with that is to just simply stop eating animal products. Stop buying these products. You know, you're voting with your dollar if you purchase these types of products. Yeah.
I want to make a clarification. We're the second in total number of hogs, but we're number one in concentration of hogs in the world. So we have 10 million hogs in a 10-county area. So by geographic strength, the highest. It's about 60 hogs to one person where the industry is.
60 hogs to one person in this state. That's kind of incredible. All right, let's have Jan. Yeah, so that's a great question. So the question was, what's the difference in regards to environmental impact of vegetarianism versus veganism? So a lot of those studies that we looked at, especially in that first section of the presentation, actually looked at vegetarian as well as veganism. And if anyone would like that, email me and I can send you those studies. I have dozens of studies on this subject that I could share with you. And so in truth, veganism does tend to be superior to vegetarianism from an environmental perspective, but it's not a huge difference. That vegetarianism is much better for the environment than typical meat eating. So I think what we find based on the science is there's a pretty clear trend, whereas as you cut animal products out of your diet, your dietary environmental impact lessens. So veganism is the best, but vegetarianism is still gonna be very good from an environmental perspective, particularly, especially cow. Cow is incredibly bad for the environment, like so unsustainable. So, again, I think the reason we should embrace veganism is because of these environmental impacts, but also because of the ethical implications we discussed, and also because of its greater contributions to sustainability. Yeah, in the back.
I just wanted to add to that the most efficient animal product, including milk, is chicken. So chicken is the most efficient animal product you can eat. It takes 7 plant calories for 1 chicken calorie to produce. So, the plants have a 1-to-1 ratio, chickens have a 7-to-1, and those are the most efficient animal products we possibly consume.
Right.
I also had a question about, what should we be thinking if we are not vegan today and want to go vegan tomorrow? Do we need to buy supplements? Do we need to think about protein? Let us know how to do it tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So check out some of these resources. There's great resources online, and Caitlin can get there with you a little bit. But, going vegan, I would love for everyone to go vegan overnight. I know that's not super realistic for everybody, but take it one step at a time, right? So start with one thing. Say you're drinking milk now. Start with plant-based milks. They're really easy. And just go one step at a time. But when it comes to vegan nutrition and vegan health, there's actually one thing that you have to supplement. That's vitamin B12. A lot of people have to supplement vitamin B12 in general anyway, but you cannot find B12 in plants. Besides that, you can find every nutrient in a plant-based diet. You just have to do the research. I can't go over everything now, but for instance, protein is a non-issue. If you're eating enough calories for your day, non-issue.
It's not a real thing.
Yeah. It really isn't. If you're eating enough calories, you're gonna be eating enough protein. There's no such thing as protein deficiency or in the developed world, virtually. You only see people with protein deficiency if they're not eating enough calories. So protein's a non-issue. There's a few nutrients you have to be careful of, but if you're just eating a lot of like dark leafy greens, a lot of beans, just a varied whole food diet, you're gonna be okay. But you know what? Talk to other vegans, consult some of these resources, and even talk to a doctor or a dietitian, or there's a lot of resources out there on that. Let me get Randall first, and then.
Two things. One, I think vitamin K2 is one that is only available in animal sources, so that is one critical nutrient that is not available on vegan. That's number one. If you read paleo literature, which I subscribe to largely, not entirely, they believe that humanity made an evolutionary long-term without grains 10,000 years ago. So, two questions. Can you be a vegan without, if you buy that premise, can you be a healthy vegan without having any grains? Two, what do you substitute for that? And the whole question of then agriculture raising environmental impact.
Okay, yeah, so let's address paleo diet for a second. So I'm gonna be honest here. The paleo diet is not based in science. There's really nothing scientific about the paleo diet. I'm sorry, I have to be honest here. So when we're talking about actually like Paleolithic humans, they ate a super varied diet. In fact, most Paleolithic humans probably consumed primarily plant-based diets, but it really depends where you were living in the globe, okay? If you live in the Arctic, you're consuming mostly animal products. If you're living in on the equator in a tropical area, you're consuming almost all plant products. Okay, so humans are omnivores, and we're opportunistic. We can survive on a really large range of diets. There's no question about that. However, we're primarily plant-eating omnivores, just like the other great apes, and we probably do better eating mostly plants. So I honestly don't think too highly of paleo. They have some good ideas, but mostly, their whole idea of we should eat how, humans 20,000 or 10,000 years ago ate. There's just not a lot of science to back that up. As for grains, you can certainly be a healthy vegan without eating grains. I know gluten-free vegans. Actually, the person who used to have Caitlin's position at Asheville Vegan Outreach, he's gluten-free, he doesn't eat grains, and he's been vegan for years, super dedicated. So it's more than possible. I mean, I'm not gluten-free and I eat grains, so I couldn't tell you exactly what to eat, but you can eat lots of beans, you can eat nuts and seeds, you can eat starchy vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes. You don't have to eat grains. I personally don't think grains are unhealthy. I'm not a nutrition expert, so I do fine with them, but yeah. Grains absolutely have protein in them, so that's something you'd have to think of go into that more. And then your final question on the environmental impacts of grains. There's no question that monoculture agriculture has negative environmental impacts. It can have substantial impacts. This is a difficult question. I think what we should be doing is striving to be eating more local and small scale agriculture type crops. And so that can include grains or it cannot, but so we can do better. There are crops that are better than other crops, but at the end of the day, it's better to eat crops than animal products. It's better to eat those grains than to eat any animal product. You're gonna have a lower environmental impact.
By and large, a lot of the grains that we grow in this country aren't fed.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're automatically produced.
I think in this country, it's not as much globally, but this country, I think 2/3 of all the grains we grow are fed to livestock. And again, we talked about super inefficient.
And the other, just one more point to make is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. There is no utopia, so you try your hardest every day to be good to yourself, good to your planet, good to your body, good to animals, good to other living beings.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of people like to think that veganism is about perfection, and that's definitely not the case. Veganism is not about perfection. We live in a society where anything you do is going to have an impact on other humans and animals. It's nearly impossible to avoid that. We just do the very best we can, and I think veganism is a pretty clear step towards doing the best we can. It's saying that we're going to do our best not to exploit and harm animals. It doesn't mean we're going to be 100%. Yeah.
So
Right.
So I stopped eating land animals in February. That I already wasn't eating that much meat to start with, so that's been going pretty good. So my next hurdle really is dairy, because and part of my whole way of being in the world is just to share and to educate. I'm a social worker, so I want to always understand why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them, and then be able to communicate that to other people. So the next step in the dairy part is, because it seems to me, if I understand what you're saying correctly, what I've understood before, is anything that has to do with cows is gonna be a higher environmental impact. So not drinking milk and avoiding cheese and things like that is gonna be a better next step than like stopping to eat eggs. Stop eating eggs. Although I have pretty much stopped eating eggs. But is that right? I mean, is it like the bigger the animal, the bigger the environmental impact, and so working your way down makes sense that way?
Yeah, I mean, so the question was, is basically, does dairy have a higher environmental impact than eggs? And yes, certainly true. It's not necessarily about the size of the animal. There's a reason that cows, like goats, are also really environmentally destructive as well. And it's because they're ruminants, so they have all ruminant animals have basically a stomach that ferments grass, and this produces methane. And so this is one of the big reasons that animals like cows are so unsustainable, is because they're producing tons of methane. So certainly eggs and chickens in general are going to have a lower impact than dairy or eating cows. And there's also something, we didn't get to talk about this in the presentation, but we have to think about what dairy and eggs mean, okay, from an ethical perspective. And to be frank, this is a large scale, like, exploitive of the female reproductive system. And it's a serious problem. Like, these animals are artificially inseminated. And not just that, you're breaking the mother-child bond. So cows have really strong bonds with their calves. And so to take the cow milk, we can't allow the calves to drink the milk. And so very soon after birth, and this is in pastured or conventional systems, we take the calf from their mom, from the mother cow, causing serious harm. And then every year, basically, we have to artificially inseminate, which is a very horrific process. We have to artificially inseminate these animals so they keep producing milk for us. And so it's bad for the environment, and I have to say that it's very anti-feminist, the whole industry of dairy. It really is. I mean, we simply should not be exploiting the female reproductive system like this on this massive scale.
Again, I just want to add one thing. Those babies are killed. So if you think that there is no crime or no meat or no slaughter in dairy, those babies are killed so that the mother can be hooked to a machine for up to 14 months, and then the process is repeated.
Right.
It might be the most horrific industry because it doesn't end with the death of the mother. The cycle repeats and repeats.
Yeah, absolutely. Dairy is a horrific industry. And to your point, in India, people don't eat a lot of cow meat, right? It's a cultural, religious thing. But they drink a lot of milk, they consume a lot of dairy. But funny enough, ironically, India is the #1 exporter of cow meat in the world. It's because when you commodify an animal, when you treat them as property, when you treat these sentient beings as property and not individuals, you're not gonna just dispose of those animals when they're done producing milk. You're gonna slaughter them and sell them for meat. And so any type of system like this is going to result in the death of these animals. It's unavoidable when you treat these animals as commodities.
Can
Yes.
we also talk about the environmental destruction that we face when we eat aquatic animals?
Yeah, so environmental destruction associated with aquatic animals, right? So eating fish and these types of animals. So we didn't get to touch on this either, but this is a massive problem. So some of you might be familiar that we have some really huge problems with overfishing. I actually worry about the oceans maybe more than the land, because we don't live in the oceans. We just exploit the oceans without thinking about it at all. Okay, and so we have fished out like 90% of the top predators in the ocean. We have completely decimated entire populations of fish. We actually eat, some estimates, into the hundreds of billions of fish every year. Okay, and that is simply unsustainable. That consuming seafood like we do is basically fishing out the oceans. And it's actually very scary, and it's super problematic. So there's a lot more information there, and I'm actually not as familiar with the aquatic aspects of consuming fish and all of that as I am with the land animals, but there's no question that's a huge problem. we have time for one more question, if we have one more. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm vegan for a long time, but I have difficulties seeing people loving cats and dogs. Really caring about animals. But some reason there's this distinction that we I love cats and dogs, but it's okay to eat drink milk and eat pigs. And I just have a very hard time to realize that people actually discriminate between different species. And I believe we as humans, we're obviously more intelligent, and I think we should protect the weaker animals and not discriminate based on their shape and where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. So what she was saying is that there's basically this disconnect where we love cats and dogs and we exploit and kill these other animals like cows, pigs and chickens. And she said a really interesting word, like we discriminate against certain animals, right? And so there's a term called speciesism. So speciesism is like racism or sexism. Okay, it's basically we are, basically exploiting and discriminating against a certain class, in this case species, based on something that they're born with, right? So it's just like racism. We're discriminating against a group of people based on race, something they're born with. So speciesism is very comparable. There's no reason to be speciesist and say we care about dogs and cats more than we care about cows, pigs, and chickens. They all have the same inherent value. They all have the same, they all have their same inherent value in their life. They all want to live, right? And so there's no reason, logical reason to discriminate against one, to exploit one, and to love and care for the others. We should be loving and caring for all these animals.